Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into a fear that maybe feels a bit distant now, but for centuries it really gripped people.
Yeah, taphophobia.
Taphophobia, exactly. The fear of being buried alive.
That's right. And what's really interesting, I think, is that it wasn't just some, vague horror story.
Right.
It actually stemmed from some very real situations back then, historically speaking.
Mm.
So this deep dive, it's not just about a spooky feeling. It's more about understanding how this tangible threat really shaped how people felt and even led to some pretty wild inventions.
Wild is a good word for it. We've been looking through an overview of taphophobia, sort of tracing its history, and yeah, some unsettling innovations it sparked.
Definitely unsettling.
So our mission today really is to get why this fear, which seems so, I don't know, old, was once so common and how people tried to deal with it.
Makes sense.
Okay, so let's get into it. What was going on back then that made people genuinely terrified of this?
Well, the big thing is, before modern medicine really kicked in, figuring out if someone was actually definitively dead wasn't always easy.
Right. Not like today.
Not at all. You had conditions like comas or catalepsy.
Catalepsy.
Yeah, like a state where you're unconscious, muscles totally rigid, or sometimes just a really, really faint pulse.
Okay.
Things that could easily be mistaken for, well, death?
And these weren't just theoretical worries.
Oh, no. Tragically, no. The source material we looked at points to documented cases where these mistakes happened. Awful consequences, obviously.
Yeah, the numbers mentioned are pretty shocking. There's that research from William Tebb back in 1905.
Tebb's collection.
He compiled this list. I mean, 219 near live burials.
Here it is, yeah.
149 actual live burials.
Right.
And then cases of people waking up during embalming or even dissection.
It's gruesome stuff. Hard to wrap your head around the horror of it.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the lack of medical certainty. Was there anything happening around then to try and, well, improve things, even slightly?
Well, yeah, in the 18th century, you started seeing the development of early resuscitation techniques. People were trying to figure this stuff out.
Right.
And organizations like the Royal Humane Society were formed, partly focused on, trying to revive people who appeared drowned or otherwise suddenly dead.
So there was an awareness building.
An awareness, yeah. But the methods were still pretty rudimentary compared to now, and the fear persisted. I mean, there's another report later, 1896.
Oh, yeah?
An American funeral director, T.M. Montgomery. He estimated that, based on exhumations, maybe nearly 2% of people buried were actually victims of suspended animation.
2%. That still sounds incredibly high.
It does. Now, we should mention there are counter-arguments. A folklorist named Paul Barber suggested these numbers might be overblown.
How so?
He argued that people might have misinterpreted the normal signs of decomposition, shifting bodies, fluid expulsion as signs of struggle after burial.
Okay. So maybe not quite as common as some reports suggested, but the fear was definitely real.
The fear was absolutely real, regardless of the exact statistics. That uncertainty was the perfect breeding ground for taphophobia.
And that probably fueled all those unsettling stories you hear, the urban legends.
Exactly. Tales of, waking up trapped underground years later.
Or finding corpses with really long beards, supposedly grown after death.
Right, or hands scratched up, raised towards the coffin lid. Grim stuff.
Really taps into that primal fear, doesn't it? Being trapped, helpless.
Totally. And specific stories circulated, too, like Anne Hill Carter Lee, Robert E. Lee's mother, actually.
What happened with her?
Well, the story goes this was back in 1804. She was declared dead, placed in the family vault. But later, a sexton supposedly heard noises from inside.
No way.
Yeah, they opened it up, and she was alive. Rescued.
Wow. Now, are these stories always verifiable, or?
That's the thing. Hard to say how much is fact, how much is, embellished over time, but it doesn't really matter in terms of the fear, right?
Okay.
The fact these stories were told and believed just cranked up the public anxiety.
And it wasn't just sort of general public anxiety. It reached pretty high levels of society, didn't it? Famous people worried about this.
Oh, definitely. Some very well-known historical figures had this fear, like Frédéric Chopin, the composer.
Chopin. What did he do?
He actually requested that after he died, his heart be cut out.
Just to be absolutely sure.
Just to be absolutely positively sure he wasn't buried alive. That's pretty intense.
That tells you something about how deep this fear ran, yeah.
It really does. It shows this profound lack of trust in the medical diagnosis of death back then. It wasn't just a minor worry for these people.
Who else?
Well, George Washington, he apparently asked that his body not be buried for 3 days.
3 days. just to wait and see.
Exactly. Give it plenty of time, just in case. And others, too, like Hans Christian Andersen.
The writer?
Yeah, and Alfred Nobel. They both reportedly left instructions to have their arteries cut open after death.
Good grief. Again, just making absolutely certain.
Certainty was the goal. And these weren't, irrational people in other aspects of their lives. Their fears were a direct reflection of the medical realities or uncertainties of their time.
So, with this fear being so widespread, so deeply felt, it must have shown up in culture, too. Literature, art.
Oh, absolutely. It's prime material for Gothic storytelling, isn't it?
Definitely.
And Edgar Allan Poe is the name that jumps out immediately.
Of course. The premature burial.
Right. That story is just a raw dive into the psychological horror of someone consumed by taphophobia, the sheer terror of imagining it happening to you.
And wasn't it a theme in some of his other stories, too? Even if not the main plot.
Yeah, the source material we looked at points that out. Themes of being buried alive or trapped, sealed away. You see echoes in The Fall of the House of Usher.
Yeah,
Certainly.
with Madeline Usher.
Exactly. And the cask of Amontillado being walled up alive.
Oh, yeah, good point.
Even the black cat, arguably, has that sense of being sealed in with something horrifying. So literature was definitely holding up a mirror to this societal fear.
And maybe amplifying it for some readers.
Probably amplifying it for some, yeah. But maybe also, I don't know, offering a kind of catharsis for others, a way to confront the fear through fiction.
Interesting point. So, as the fear grows, gets reflected in culture,
Mm-hmm.
people start looking for practical solutions, right?
Exactly. And that's where we get to the really inventive part.
The safety coffins.
Safety coffins, yeah. It's amazing, really, the ingenuity that went into these things.
It really speaks to that human need for control, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Even over death, or the diagnosis of death.
Absolutely. Trying to build in a failsafe. So what did they have? Well, common features were things like glass lids.
You could see in, check on the person.
Right. Visual confirmation or, disproof of death. And then you had all sorts of signaling systems.
Like the bells.
Like the bells, yeah. Ropes or wires running from inside the coffin up to a bell on the surface.
So you wake up, you pull the rope.
You pull the rope, ring the bell, someone comes running, hopefully.
Wow. Any other features?
Some had breathing pipes, tubes running down to provide air just in case, buying time until rescue.
Incredible. You can just picture the sheer desperation and hope tied up in those mechanisms.
Definitely. And it wasn't just like crackpot inventors. Our source mentions a wealthy South African businessman, Jacobus Arnoldus Graf.
Yeah.
He invested heavily in these kinds of safety measures for himself. So the fear and the desire for these solutions cut across different social classes.
So about those bells, is that where we get phrases like saved by the bell or dead ringer?
Ah, that's a really common belief. It seems logical, right?
Yeah.
But actually, most language experts say no.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the origins of those phrases seem to be earlier and unrelated. Saved by the bell likely comes from boxing.
Oh, okay.
And dead ringer probably relates to like horse racing or lookalikes.
Yeah.
But the coffin bell image is so strong, the myth persists. It's a good story.
Huh. The power of a good story indeed. Okay, so people are inventing these elaborate coffins, but then medical science starts catching up, right? Does the fear start to fade?
Generally, yes. As medicine got better, especially in the early 20th century, doctors got much more reliable at diagnosing death.
Better tools, better understanding.
Exactly. So public confidence grew. And that widespread, intense fear of premature burial did start to subside in many places.
But not entirely gone. The source material mentioned periods where alarm flared up again.
That's right. Even in more recent times, if there's a news story about a medical error where someone was wrongly declared dead,
It brings it all back.
it seems to reignite that underlying anxiety. It suggests there's still maybe a tiny bit of lingering unease about the absolute finality of it all and our trust in the diagnosis.
Makes sense. And is it still a more significant fear in some parts of the world today?
It seems so. Our source mentioned a study looking at women in Pakistan,
Right.
and it found a surprisingly high rate of severe taphophobia among those with existing mental health conditions.
Interesting.
And even closer to home, so to speak, there was a recent study mentioned reporting cases among older people in the west of Ireland.
So it's not purely a historical thing.
Not purely, no. Perhaps less widespread, less intense than it once was in, say, Europe or North America, but definitely not vanished entirely from human experience.
Okay, so let's pull this all together. We started with this very real historical possibility accidental live burial due to limited medical knowledge.
Right, which bred this intense fear, taphophobia.
And that fear wasn't just abstract. It led to real-world actions, people demanding waiting periods, requesting specific post-mortem procedures.
Like Chopin or Washington.
Exactly. And it fueled legends, inspired literature, especially Poe.
And drove that whole fascinating wave of invention, the safety coffins.
These incredibly creative, if kind of morbid, solutions.
Precisely. It's just a really powerful example of how a specific fear, rooted in the realities of the time, can shape culture, anxiety, and even technology.
Yeah, it really is. So maybe a final thought for you listening. Think about our own time. What are the big anxieties we have now?
Good question.
Even fears that might seem a bit irrational looking back later. How might they be driving innovation or shaping the stories we tell today? What surprising things might come out of our modern anxieties?
Definitely something to mull over.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for taking this deep dive with us.